Hi, everybody. It's Susan Clinton and Erica Mello. We're here with podcast number 95,
Mhm.
the knee and what it has to do with the whole body.
Oh my God. Five more to 100. Yes, this was a Facebook Live that we did in April of last year. I can't believe it, almost a year ago. It was early on, and we talked about all things related to the knee. And it's not just one case study, it is multiple patients. And we had a lot of input from our Facebook group as well. So you'll get not just us, but you'll get some questions we answered right live on the spot about the knee. And we literally checked the knee and we not checked it, but we discussed the knee and we talked about relationship up and down, and it was everything you want to know about the knee. So we hope you really enjoy it, and it's one of those oldies but certainly goodies, and will last a lifetime for sure.
Yes,
We
absolutely. And also, we have our retreat coming up, which is going to be on May 1st.
mhm,
That you're going to be getting information, especially if you're on our email list. So please go to our website, sign up for our email list, and get with us so we can get you ready to join us. We're going to be releasing the information soon for how to apply for hot seats and what to expect at the retreat and the things that you will learn.
yeah,
We're hoping to even have a live client in to assess as well. So
yeah,
we've got some good stuff cooking. We'd love for everybody to join us. And
yes. We
thank you,
listen.
everyone, for your listening. Remember, we were trying to get to 100 reviews by
Yeah,
podcast number 100.
yeah.
So keep them coming. Thank you so much and enjoy the podcast.
Thank you.
So the reason I brought up the knee is because I kind of feel like in many of my cases and things that I've been working with, especially with people with hip issues, that a lot of times it's because the knee is so stiff. And the stiffness or the pain that they're having in their knee, secondary or just kind of had chronically for a long time, really tends to drive how much hip hinging and how much hip bending that they really do. And when I started looking at them more functionally and just really kind of like, getting up out of a chair and bringing their knees back and, climbing stairs and doing different things, instead of just focusing right in on the lumbo-pelvic hip area, just kind of started watching the knees and realizing that knees aren't getting really straight and knees are not bending really well. And, kind of going back down and addressing the knee issue. Well, I don't lunge, I don't squat because I have knee pain.
Right.
And, how long has the knee stuff been going on? Well, for a long time. And I was told never to do lunges and squats, which I wish that people would quit saying that, but they do. So anyway, but I just thought it was interesting because as I was kind of looking back and thinking about what we wanted to talk about and how I approach teaching manual therapy, is, when I'm looking at the lower kinetic chain, I kind of have always said, go after the knee first, make sure the knee is moving well, because it's such a transitional joint between the hip and the foot that if the knee is not functioning very well, or it's being held back, or it's being protected, or it's just not moving as well as it could be because of fear or pain or whatever may be going on there, that we need to kind of get that going first, because
Yeah.
it really is going to, I think, in my opinion, really drive a lot of what may be happening at the hip and the foot. I know we've talked a lot about the foot, and some of the progressions that you discussed, Erica, with the foot was, using knee bend,
Right.
and kind of the progressions in moving, the foot through the motions of going up on toes and down on, and down and doing it with the knee bent and the knee straight. It involves so much of that, and so much of the hip really involves not only just the foot, but the knee itself. Because if we're going to get people to squat, if we're going to get people to lean forward to get up out of a chair, yes, the hip needs to move, but they may not be moving the hip because it's not the hip that's the problem, it's the knees,
Yeah.
and the knees are stiff or whatever. They've lost range of motion, beyond 90 degrees in their knees, and they can't really, access a deeper knee bend for
Yes.
sitting down into lower chairs and getting up out of lower chairs, or even stair climbing, hill climbing, up and down on curbs, things like that.
Yeah.
And, the hip may be hurting, but it may be the knee that's really holding them back.
Yeah. Do you actually think that knees, and maybe beyond the osteoarthritic knee or the post-op knee replacement, do you think knees are actually stiff in the sense that there's an articular joint stiffness?
Mm-hmm. So
this could be a loaded question.
Yeah, right. I know. I'm sitting there going, okay, how do I go around this and like start to put this together here? So let's look at stiffness different from pain.
Right.
Because people can have very stiff knees and never have any pain.
Yeah, of course.
And people can have very painful knees, but they move very well.
Yeah.
So we can kind of take pain and put it to the side for a few minutes and just talk about what real stiffness really is. And is it really stiff? Mm-hmm. Or is it because the muscles are holding? And one of the things that I learned very early on when I was in physiology of just joint physiology, not joint biomechanics or any of that kind of stuff, just basic physiology, mm-hmm. is that when you have an injury to the joint, one of the things that happens is the muscles pull the joint into an open pack position because it feels better to not have compression. And so the muscles themselves pull it into an open pack position. It's very much like the muscles of the spine when we have a very highly irritable region around the disc. We'll pull the spine into a position where we get off of that. Mm-hmm. And so, we lean off to the side and we twist. And then the reason we get the lateral shift is because then we have to like hold our eyes on the horizon. Mm-hmm. But that's all set up because of muscles pulling. So if you trace it back that way and you think about capsular patterns being set up by muscles pulling joints into open pack positions for chronic periods of time, then I would have to say that it's almost, is it muscles that are just so guarding and so locked into that pattern? Is that really where the stiffness comes in? Or is it a true capsular pattern where they've actually really lost range of motion? Yeah. And some of the, so the idea is that if you can, get movement going, however you want to do it, if you want to do a manipulation, if you want to do several repetitive movements in or out of weight bearing, however you want to do it, and you can get the knee to change pretty fast, then we know it's probably a neuromuscular holding pattern. And I think you and I have talked about this quite a bit. But the knee is one of those places where you're going to see a capsular pattern probably more often, I think, than many other joints. And it's, because it's a pretty straightforward capsular pattern. It loses rotation of the tibia. So it doesn't get that end locking in extension. So it lacks about 10 or 15 degrees of full extension. It can extend, but it's not a great amount of extension. And it loses flexion. Yeah, for sure. Sometimes they can flex to about 100 degrees, maybe 115, but oftentimes you'll really see it, just to about 90, 95, depending upon how long, that's occurred. Because we do know that there's real tissue changes over time, and tissue begins to become a problem over time if it's not moved. It does change. And so if knees are left alone for long periods of time, they lose that end range of motion on both ends because they're basically just going from sit to stand, or maybe a sit to stand that doesn't require them to bend more than 90 degrees or 95 degrees, functionally, to get in and out of cars or on and off of chairs. They're not sitting down low. They're not, crouching down to the floor. They've begun to adopt new behaviors of bending over to pick things up, which there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not squatting to do it. They're not, squatting or and hip hinging to squat down on to get onto the floor. They're finding other ways to get onto the floor. And, so we have to kind of think about what is going to be the best way to really begin to start to address those changes. And thank you, Julia, for your question, because she's saying, so how best to address tissue changes? Ah, perfect. I can't see it. Oh, got it. Yeah. And so do you want to start with that one? Oh, sorry. I never can get this right. Sorry. Hold on. Sorry, guys. You're talking about tissue change. Sorry, guys.
a little technically inept here today. You're talking about tissue changes in that have resulted from not flexing or not bending.
Right.
So
Beyond, I think we're all pretty comfortable
extending.
if it's neuromuscular holding,
right.
Patterns of holding. We know how to get those to move, because we can just get them moving and get them moving in novel ways to really think about, that kind of stuff. But what about people who are really having true tissue changes?
You mean from shy of doing like a soft tissue release, but at the end of the day, if the tissue changes have been so dramatic, like you're going to see in an osteoarthritic knee, in standing, a lot of time, those people don't stand with their knees, straight. They're standing in 10 degrees of knee flexion. What is that pack position? I think it's 5 degrees of knee flexion, I think, but they're not straightening their knees out. And, thus they're going to have hamstrings are going to be quite, stiff. We can go on and on about Shirley Sarman's, definition of stiffness, right? The sarcomeres are shortening. However, depending how long that is, I do think over time, those tissue changes can occur. You can remedy those. I personally like low. So from a positioning standpoint, I like a low load. We'll use knee extension as an example. Low load, long duration type of stretching for those types of changes. I mean, I do a lot of hands-on, as you do, and I'll go in and sit there and I'll release, and that does help in the short term. But if the tissue changes are so dramatic, you need to have some I believe low load, long duration type of stretching in the treatment plan. It's akin to like elbow flexion extension. A kid comes out of a cast, they can't straighten their arm. So, and I also do believe in especially with knees, and getting them in to position. I have learned the hard way not to start out with like squatting and your typical leg press, because those particular exercises I do not believe are helpful. In terms of just other types of movements that I like to do, I actually like to put patients over like a bolster. I do a lot of release with movement. So I'll get my hands underneath the back of their knee in the popliteal fossa, and I'll just have them do a little bit of extension of the knee as far as they can go, back down. I do that. I also have them go prone, and I have them dorsiflex their feet. I have them tighten their glutes and lift their knee up, so it's like a straightening. I'll do things like that. Those are two of my sort of go-tos for like a lack of extension pattern. Do you want to add anything in here, or should I keep going?
So no, I like the idea of if we can get them prone. If you can't get them prone, you can actually still do the same exercise with them leaning over a countertop. They can bring their leg back. They can dorsiflex and come up onto their toe, and they can work on extending their knee from that position. It's just a novel input to the system to kind of help see how many different ways we can get them to think about getting their legs straight without just trying to lift their foot up and tighten up their quads.
Yeah, straight.
Because because we're just trying to see what other kind of gliding and sliding they might get. I think that the other thing to consider with the knee, and it's one that is overlooked a lot, is kind of attraction mobilization. And I think Julia's writing in here about needing it in both directions, prone knee hangs, dorsiflex ankles and prone. I also like, when I'm working on, just even knee extension is just having them stand and put a weight on their ankle.
Yes.
And, as they walk and swing, the weight actually begins to be something you have to watch them and make sure that it doesn't create a pattern that is actually making it worse, but that is feeding into a pattern that you're looking for, which is a little bit more of that, eccentric hamstring work and, lengthening of the knee as they swing. Sometimes you can get them to think about swinging the weight, whereas, that just gives them a little bit of something to work with at the end of their foot. And it provides a little bit of like kind of traction, to that knee joint as they kind of move forward. So that can be, some fun things. And you can also do it with them, standing up on a step and, the weight on the ankle, and they can just kind of freely swing the leg that way. So, you get a little bit of traction work, through the knee, because it's great for me to sit there and just yank and pull on their knee. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, what are they going to go home with?
They're going to resort to the same strategy, and they're just going to stand in knee flexion. I like that. I also have patients sometimes put their heels on a half foam roller, because that does force you to go into a little bit of knee
extension, and just stand there and maybe just do side to side, things like that. Because a lot of the people who are lacking that, shy of post-op, ACLs, are mostly people who have arthritic, quote unquote, changes and in their knees. And, a straight leg race at the end of the day, I don't give those out much anymore. To be honest, I don't think that they're so helpful unless the person's had, post-op knee, that type of thing. You'll try to do some quad recruitment, but I do a lot, in prone. A lot of people can't get in prone. I like the one off the table. I also actually have them. I've started doing this a lot more now, is walking backwards. Because when you walk backwards and you get that forefoot down and then you have to drop the heel, that straightens the knee out. It has to, right? Or you're going to be walking back like a crab, right? So walking backwards, barefoot, if preferably, will really help straighten the knee out. And it's not like walk backwards willy-nilly, walk backwards and take a step. Like sometimes I'm like on the floor, on my, literally kneeling down on the floor, and I'm trying to have my hands on their knee, and I'm literally trying to help them straighten it as they're stepping backwards, because that's a great hands-on technique that you can do to induce proprioceptive input. And because some people don't know what knee extension is because they haven't had it for so long. Right.
And just that kind of reaching back kind of gives them a different cue.
Yes.
It's just a different cue for the brain. So the brain is going at it from a different movement pattern perspective, which I think can be very helpful as well. We have a couple of questions here.
I can't see them, so you read
off.
off.
Okay, I'll be happy to read them out.
Okay.
So I'm going to butcher your name, M-E-T-T-E. I'm going to say Mete, but please forgive me if it's wrong. From New York, and she says, as for terminal knee extension, do you have any theories as to why the right knee tends to have more terminal knee extension than the left?
Oh, I've not
Any
seen
thoughts
that.
on that.
Oh gosh, I have not seen that, but my thoughts would be maybe because most people are right-handed, right dominant. I actually haven't seen that. My first guess would be the fact that, the dominant side, or people tend to do more things on the right side. I don't know. That's a good question. That would be my guess.
It's an excellent question and a great clinical observation.
Yeah.
And it is certainly not one that I've paid attention to, but I will more and see what I can come up with, more to follow.
That's
and
excellent.
If you have any theories of your own, please write them into the
type
box.
them in.
Definitely, for sure. And then Julia says another way to really get a good knee extension is to stand on the affected leg and really do a high march with the unaffected leg. So if you've got a single knee that's a little bit affected, or even both, maybe just high marching, because it'll help them gain extension, lift that knee up above 90 degrees of hip flexion.
Yes.
So that can be a really handy one to do, even if you're just working on something functionally, such as getting up onto the, thank you, I'm glad I didn't butcher your name, so that you can get, by reaching up to maybe 2 steps up instead of 1 step up. Something like that, like a high step up, into, like what we have to do for buses and, public trans and, at different places. I mean, I know sometimes subways are right on the same level, like Erica doesn't drive. So we talk about different car seats. I have to jump in. Erica can talk a little bit more about public trans from New York anyway. But I know that there's some places where I've done public trans where that bus step is really high.
Oh, God, it's high here too.
She's asking me, so Mete's asking, as per my mentor, Earl Patman, who was mine as well, that is his clinical experience, but I can't remember why, or if there is a why. And with Earl, that guy was so, he still is, he's still out there kicking.
Still out there.
So doggone smart, and has so much clinical experience under his belt. I'm going to put that out, Mete, on the NAOMT clinical faculty instructor page, and see if I can't start digging for some answers. So stay tuned and Tough to Treat as soon as I find out what people's thoughts are. And if I can't, I'm going to call him.
Great.
I want to talk to him anyway. So I'm just going to say, remember back when? I'd have to go look at my notes too.
Yeah.
So that's a great clinical observation though. Why more on the right than on the left?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I actually had a patient who I've spoken about before. He had hip issues, and he had his driver was a thorax. However, once again, as we started to progress his program, he had a history of left knee issues, which he didn't come to see me for, but they were in his story. And this is similar to the podcast that not the one that got released today, but the one that got released last week, where it's called High Performance and Secondary Drivers. So this guy's knee, so it's his right hip and his left knee. So his hip got much better. And then we were doing some lunges to get some hip mobility, and his left knee started to bother him. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. So why was his knee bothering him? It bothered him occasionally, not enough even to come in to see me. He told me at the first visit, it wasn't like, if it were my knee, I wouldn't be bothered. But he hadn't exercised, hadn't worked out at that point, and now he's loading. So for him, he's hypermobile. And it was when he put his right leg in front and his left leg behind, sort of in that when that left leg is going into a little bit of extension and then going down into a lunge. And that's when it bothered him. I did an assessment of his knee, and he had a lot of lateral joint line compression, right? Overactive lateral hamstrings, overactive lateral quad, really sort of common in that scenario. So I have found that with secondary drivers or secondary causes or issues, or even tertiary, you don't necessarily need to give them a full-blown rehab program for the knee. I mean, unless the knee is the primary driver or issue they came in for. However, with him, what we determined, I did this virtually as well as in the clinic, we did do some release work to his lateral gastroc, his lateral quad, as well as his lateral hamstring. Just easy. I actually took a belt, mostly for decreasing tissue tone. And you know, those seated mulligan mobilizations where they're seated off the edge. You've got the belt on the ankle, and all you're doing is just distraction of the tibia, the tib fem joint. I learned that years ago in a mulligan course. I tend to do that a bit just for proprioceptive input. We have the belt in the clinic. I use it. And so I did a little bit of that with him, taught him how to release his hamstring, and basically, honestly, I gave him 2 exercises. One he stopped doing because it was easy. So the first one I gave him was in sitting, just sitting, basically pushing his heel into the ground, activating posterior chain, and feel in that position when you do a heel, when you push the heel into the ground, are you activating medial quad, medial hamstring? Are you, or are you, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't want to be over-activating the lateral column. So I had him do that and had him do a little bit of a knee extension, all closed chain, and then return. That was easy for him. So we moved on. And then then the second one I gave him was just literally standing. So because the issue is mostly with the right leg forward, left leg back, I gave him leg curls. I mean, honest to God, leg curls in that position. And that did it for his knee. He was fine. So, right?
Yeah. So I have an update from the podcast that was just dropped today.
Oh, yes.
On the Achilles tendinosis. And which is what spurred me to kind of, because I was been thinking about the knee because I saw the client.
Yep.
We did a telehealth review earlier this week, and he wasn't willing to put dishwashing soap on the floor to do the to do the like walking, because I was trying to figure out how to do
like
gliding. Because he can't get to the rink, to the ice rink, just to skate and glide.
Yeah.
But what we did do is we put 2 dish towels on the floor. And I just had him on the one leg. I just said, just use your unaffected leg to kind of hold and just push back and glide backwards. That's where I found out his knee wasn't extending well.
Oh, interesting.
And it was like, that is so doggone interesting, because now, without that great knee, and it wasn't much, you could just, you just had to look. Yeah. I mean, I would probably, if I had to guess with the goniometer, I'd have to say 10 degrees.
Yep.
Maybe not even that much, but it was clear that he wasn't getting the full extension as he was gliding backwards. Yep. And I don't know how much of it is neuromuscular holding because of the pain from the heel.
Yep.
Or if this lack of extension over time has caused this, gastroc muscle to have a different pull onto the insertion of the calcaneus, where that whole thing has been set up for so long. And remember, if you listen to the podcast, I mean, spoiler alert, this has been going on for a long time. And we were talking about the chronicity of some of these things. And that's why I think this is so timely because I had the opportunity to go back and say, do that on the other leg. And I said, I want you to tune into your knees
Mm-hmm.
and tell me what the difference is. And he could tell me right away that the difference is that the knee where my ankle, this is the knee that hurts me. When I get these twinges and these pops and these things, and I've had them my whole life. And since I've been a wrestler, when I was a kid, I blew my knee out and had to have surgery.
Oh gosh.
There's a lot to unpack there, but that turned out to be an absolute fabulous exercise for him because he could really kind of begin to feel that. And it was like, let's, kind of play back and forth between this and see if we can't start to get some increased range of motion.
Yep. I love that dishwashing.
On that particular side.
Yep.
And so we used kitchen towels, and that worked fine. He just
mimicked the treadmill.
Yeah, just kind of, but mostly the intent was backwards gliding.
Yes.
Was what I was trying to do so that, we get this kind of motion going, because we were looking for that eccentric lengthening,
right?
With the weight bearing,
yes.
But going in a different way, not just lowering the whole body weight down, but just gliding back for that lengthening and, for those changes we talked about.
Yep.
Trying to implement in there. And so it was fun to take some of that new stuff we talked about and try that. But it was really, kind of like a Dom moment for me, like, oh, Susan, come on. But just looking at that, it just had the ability to sit there, your lens from the computer can be different than your lens up close.
Yes.
Because I'm not sure I would have actually even thought of that exercise, but I was just trying to think of gliding, and we talked about, that other thing we had seen pictures of, and I thought, let's just give it a try and see what happens. But it was very interesting. And so I really feel like the knee has to be, so we added knee stuff into his program, because we really need to get that whole kinetic chain moving in some different directions, because it may be that the foot's being held because of another joint that is also not functioning as optimally as it should.
It's really, it's interesting point of view for sure. I tend to, and maybe I'm biased, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I tend to see the knee as the victim. However, I do agree with you in the sense that, especially when they have those movement patterns, when they're pushing back like that, you need full knee extension. Yeah. And my patient who had the hip issue, did he have full knee extension? I think he did, but I mean, wasn't focusing on the knee extension, right? And it's interesting going forward. All I know is that when he got that knee into extension, or quote unquote, and then he bent his knee hurt. And it was always when his left leg was behind, never when it's forward. If you have a true knee issue, a true, knee issue, it hurts going downstairs. It hurts when you lunge forward. Does it really hurt when you lunge backward? Sometimes, but it's, it's not, doesn't happen through across all those movement patterns. So it could be specific to position, or another muscular holding pattern.
Right, or whatever the neurotags may be.
Exactly.
And you got to look at, that's why the novel movement stuff is so fun, because if it really is going to be an issue, you're going to have the issue all the time. And so it may not be a joint biomechanical or physiological issue so much as it's a holding issue or a pattern of movement issue. And for this guy that was on that I talked about on the podcast that came out today, the biggest problem he has is after he sits for a long period, sitting in certain positions for a while, and when he stands up, it's like, that's what makes it so hard. And he limps around with a bent knee, because it's hard, he can't, and so is it because he can't tolerate the lengthening of his foot, or is it because he can't straighten his knee out? Right. But it's both now. Yeah. And at this point, like I told him, I said, it's been 2 years. Let's just add the knee in. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. It's always bothered you. So let's take care of, let's get both things, moving a little bit better. But that was really interesting, being able to do that. And then we were able to kind of just get him into a position where he could put his hands on the countertop, like you were going to do a push-up. And, bring his legs back and stay in a plank. And I said, now just snuggle up to the discomfort, go back as far as you can, where you just begin to feel that pull on the back of the heel or the back of the knee, and just play with letting the knee bend and straighten, rather than coming up off the heel and down, up off the heel and down. just working from that top part in there too. And so that was pretty successful.
Yeah, because you think of with the chronic Achilles, you know, that he had, people run through those eccentrics like it's, you know, because it's in the literature, it's the evidence, right? But doesn't, you know, it wasn't help. I mean, it was only going a certain way and to a certain point, and at the end of the day, the knee, I'm going to start looking at that more with my Achilles patients, because I think that's really important. You know, trying to get that full knee extension, try to get that eccentric with the dish towels or the towels, whatever. I think that's great. You know, I often find also, I saw something earlier, and I'm just going to digress for a second about, you know, it's highly predictive of sort of non-contact ACL. I'm just going to go to ACL for a second. One of the main predictors of non-contact ACLs is this sort of lack of lateral stability, right? Or poor lateral stability side to side. So I'm just going to throw that out there for people who have knee issues. How are you going to assess the lateral stability? And I'm going to go.
Are you talking about lateral control?
Yes.
Okay.
Side to side.
Okay.
So the first thing that I think of is, okay, well, the thorax side to side, you know, someone has knee pain, you know, I would look at the thorax, the control, and I mean, what do you think about that? Because I was reading that earlier, and I would agree with all that, especially with the non-contact ones.
Did they say how? Were they saying the non-contact lack of control on the standing leg? Moving sideways, or?
I think it's just sideways, side to side, in terms of just close chain both feet.
I see. Okay, so they're looking at the ability of the pelvis to locate sideways back and forth, and talking about lengthening and coordinating of the lateral hip muscles.
Right.
As we kind of move forward on that. Yeah.
Correct. And I just thought that was really interesting.
It is interesting because one of the things that I think we've talked about a lot is restoring the other two planes of motion with people, which is where I'm going to take this guy once we can get that knee sorted out a little bit more. Is I want to take him into those lateral motions for the knee and the foot, because it'll make the foot kind of do, you know, this thing on the floor. But I want that knee to be able to be free to move with it and not be held stiff. You know, through it. You know, so restoring that nice frontal plane motion as well as transverse plane motion. And I think part of that may be, you know, that if they don't have great transverse plane motion or control, that may be one of the things as they go to the one side or go to the other side, you know, if they're ligament leaning and maybe not really using, you know, motor strategies, you know, for control.
You know, I had a patient.
I wonder if that puts too much stress on maybe a ligament that's at risk.
Correct.
So did they look at boys or girls with that?
I think it was mixed. I'll find it and I'll put it in the I'll put it under the comments. I had a patient who I treated some years ago now. He just had a straightforward scope for a medial meniscus tear. He was moving along, going well, and I don't know, he just wasn't sort of. I was like, he should be, you know, be able to go down. He was a hiker, to hike up and down, and he was like, something, you know, isn't right. I'm like, so I said, let me just check your thoracic rotation. So I checked his thoracic rotation. He had 0. And I was like, not 0, I'm exaggerating, but very little. And I'm like, did you have an issue with your ribs? He's like, oh yeah, I had 2 rib fractures years ago. And I'm like, so this is my point, is that this is as a post-op straight scope, right? Boom, medial meniscus, good to go, right? But he wasn't. So those are those injuries that we talk about a lot. And so I just worked on regaining that thoracic rotation, the side to side, and he was better. But I think it's important, especially with people, you know, not just persistent knee pain, but even post-op knees, because, you know, they've had a strategy, you know, a non-optimal strategy pre-op. That surgery is certainly not changing that. If anything, it's going to make it worse. Right. So you got to look at. It's great if we could see these people pre-op. We just don't have the option sometimes. But
so we have one more question that I'm going to throw out to you. Well, there's a couple here. Thinking about post-op total knee patients with limited range of motion and 2 manipulations in. So they've had the surgery, and then they've had 2, probably it sounds like, manipulations under anesthesia. It's from Julia. Any thoughts on that?
not getting.
My first thought, Julia, would be I would be thinking about some great connective tissue work, doing a lot of skin rolling in and around everything throughout the lower quarter. But this is one of those ones where I think you're going to have to like hop in with some some graded motor imagery.
Yes.
Some fear.
Absolutely.
There may be some fear avoidance, and rightly so. I mean, the knee it was probably very painful before surgery. The surgery didn't maybe change the pain because he was so highly sensitized, or she was so highly sensitized. And then, they're not making progress because it's much more of a central sensitization issue than a true connective tissue issue. So those are my thoughts on that. All of the things that you usually do, but, doing novel inputs, doing different things, maybe giving them more of a functional, as we did in rehab, much more of a functional context to what they're doing, which I'm sure you're probably already doing, but kind of thinking along the scope of, is this more of a central sensitization and how can we change that? So there's even some things you can do with the NOI group.
I was just going to say the Recognize app.
Yeah, I was just going to say Recognize Knees might be a really great, thing to add, and some of those, other graded motor imagery things that they have there, and really being able to understand their pain and different ways that they can begin to start to change their pain too.
Yeah, I like the GM. I like the mirror, but the mirror with the knee, like it's part of the whole GM.
Yeah, the mirror would be great too.
That's the first thing I would do with that guy or her, woman. I mean, that's what I would do, and I think that because that's all 2 manips and then a TK. I mean, that's
right. And just to be able to get their head around the other thing and thinking about mirror neurons and the neurons that cross over. So when you put the mirror in, it actually tricks them into thinking that their space is the other way. So that can change up some of the brain neuromatrix neurotags that are going on. Can be quite healthy because they can just sit there with the mirror. And just look at it. It's a bit freaky for people in the beginning. So that's why they don't usually do that until a little bit later in the sessions. But it sounds like he's far enough along that it's not going to hurt anything to do it. But I would really think that you start changing the brain around, you're going to start changing the tissue protection.
Yeah. And
then he probably will be able to be a bit more willing to move in new and novel ways versus he or she in novel ways versus kind of the traditional way to do it. It's, sometimes I think people actually get sensitized to exercise. They've been doing the same total knee exercise for so long that they look at the mat and they know what's going to happen. And it may be kind of like that whole, people who go into the gynecologist's office and they're okay until they see the bed with the stirrups.
Right.
And then they freak out, and it's like, what would you freak out if it was in your living room? I have people who work with dilators for, vaginal pain. And sometimes one of the things they need to do is not have it be so clinical, laying on their bed where they're expected to have sex.
Right.
And because they just, just like, can we get it in a different situation or a different circumstance with a whole different thought process around it? And so maybe he's, kind of beginning to approach that, getting them barefoot on different surfaces, getting, some just different things happening. But when I see something like that that's been going on that long, is I would really be kind of starting to really start doing some of the brain changing game stuff and everything with them.
Yeah.
And really getting that to happen. And maybe even something as cool as doing the app Clock Yourself. We've talked about that on our podcast. It's nice because it's reactive. They don't have to do great, big, huge movements, but they can stand, and put one foot on 12 when it calls 12 or 9 or 4, or, whatever. And they can make them small movements so they can get bigger, or they can sit. Then they can bend. Like, you have to bend back to 6 o'clock. You got to straighten it out to 12. You got to lean over to 3, like this, so the knee is doing just some different ways to move that aren't the same thing as, okay, get on the mat and let's, kind of push it in. Julia, I love it too.
What about
I also use it for eye stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I was going to say, I just lost my train of thought. Just watching people to sort of activate these mirror neurons. Watch people like get on a bike. Watch people, do some bending of their knees on YouTube. Watch just people just biking. Watch people bending, because that's almost that activates the premotor cortex. It's almost as good as if you're doing the motion yourself. So I would just really think out of the box with this guy. Like, just, I mean, you've done probably, all the, the ones that we would have done at this point as well. And I think that, it's tough when you have someone who's had a total knee, 2 manips. Trauma is huge, it's like PTSD for the knee.
Yes, it is. And so oftentimes just even approaching a clinic could be enough to trigger the protective, threat response. And so, really kind of trying to change it up a bit, can be quite helpful. And especially over time, because they're going to be looking and thinking in a different way, which can be very helpful. And that doesn't mean you have to sit there and do all this huge explain pain kinds of things, but you can talk to them about the connection and why we're doing this, because we have this really cool thing in our head where this side of the brain looks at this side of the body, and this side of the brain looks at this side of the body. And when we do this like little thing like crossover, the brain thinks that this hand is this hand because it's in that hand space, and we have space for that in our brain. And so what we're doing is going to let's make the brain forget that this is like a problem and start getting it on board with us, because this has been it's been protecting us for so long.
I remember when Body and Mind was when they had their website, I remember Lorimer Moseley wrote that he treated a young woman who had low back pain, severe low back pain, and he was like the umpteenth person she saw, and it only happened when she was in a race, and he could not. So what they did is they put her on the Wii, simulated a race, and boom, her back pain started. Outside of that scenario, she could sit on a bike in the gym all day long and her back pain never happened. They put her on the Wii, simulated a race, and boom. So they put her right into the situation that stressed her, but it was the only way they could reproduce her symptom and start to wean her back into the situation. So they changed the context.
And then you can use a lot of graded motor imagery around that. So whatever, this person is thinking about with knee bending, it's like, how can we change that and begin to expose them to what would happen if you did this? What would happen if you only had to be there with your knee bent for 30 seconds?
30 seconds, yeah.
Or something. What would happen if you could do that over time, and rather than sitting there trying to just make it be this way?
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope these are great ideas, Julia. Let us know how it turns out. We'd love to hear from you and see kind of what you guys were able to make of this together. Yeah, that would be great.
Do you have any more questions, or?
Nope, I think we're good here. I will report back in from Earl Petman, and I think Mette will as well, or Mette, as her name is. Like I told her, I said, I hope I didn't butcher your name. And some great questions, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. We love doing this. I always have fun when we do these. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, just feel free to comment below.
Right. And if you're watching it later and you have questions and comments, just go ahead and throw them in there. We'll come in and answer and see what's going on, and let's create some more chatter. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. All right. Bye. Enjoy.